So the question of what happens to children who die without baptism before the age of reason. Two possible solutions here. Aquinas gives the solution of limbo. So he says, look, if they die without the sacrament of baptism, they don't have sanctifying grace. So they will not experience the beatific vision because their souls haven't been transformed, given the supernatural capacity to experience that. Okay. However, they also don't experience any suffering because God will not eternally punish anybody who doesn't have the guilt of voluntary fault. Rather, in limbo, they'll experience a state of natural happiness in which all their natural human desires are fulfilled, and they don't miss what they don't have. So they don't miss the beatific vision because that was just never on the table for them. Okay, so they're still in a better state than anybody in the world who's not experiencing the life of sanctifying grace. Okay, the International Theological Commission weighed in on this less than 20 years ago. And they said limbo's possible, but they lean towards saying that the unbaptized children actually end up receiving the grace of baptism, so sanctifying grace, and therefore being admitted to the beatific vision apart from the sacrament. And they appeal to the holy innocents on this, as well as some Pauline principles about God providing opportunity for salvation to those outside the covenants. As well as God's tendency to rectify sufferings in the objective physical order. And they point to the parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke's gospel to say, look, these children are dying with suffering, okay, and without the opportunity for baptism. Therefore, God will rectify that, give them the grace of baptism apart from the sacrament, and admit them to the beatific vision, even if only in a minimal measure, okay. That's appealing, but I actually think limbo is probably the better solution on this, and there are a couple of reasons why. Number one, it protects the importance of the sacramental economy. So God has set things up so that baptism is how we receive sanctifying grace. Okay, limbo respects that. But more importantly, this gives more urgency, number one, to baptizing infants, and number two, gives preserves the sacred dignity of life in this world better. So let me explain that. First of all, if infants who die without baptism are automatically granted sanctifying grace and admitted to the beatific vision, first, that reduces the urgency for Christian parents to baptize their children before the age of reason. Their salvation is guaranteed, with or without it. Okay, so yes, there are other reasons to baptize them. Okay, but it's not as urgent. Their salvation is taken care of. Okay, they'll still experience the beatific vision. But number two, and maybe most seriously, dying in infancy then becomes a somewhat enviable proposition. Okay, so especially if the child is born into a place or culture where Christianity is persecuted, or they're not going to have the opportunity to grow up to become a Christian, then you could say, look, that child is better off dying before it commits any sins and before it has the opportunity to, say, receive atheistic indoctrination from a communist government, in which case it's going to be very hard for them to reach salvation. Okay, they'd be much better off dying before the age of reason, when they're automatically going to receive sanctifying grace and enter the beatific vision. Okay. Now, if they live into adulthood and become Christians, sure, they'll have the opportunity to merit a greater reward in heaven, but at least this gets them in the door, and they get the beatific vision at a minimal level. Okay. Whereas if they grow up to be adults, then they run the risk of turning away from that salvation and actually ending up eternally damned. Okay. So you could argue that, well, hell is even worse. It's worse than limbo as well. So they'd still be in a better spot if they died and went to limbo than if they go to hell. And that's fair. But at least if we say their fate is limbo, then the unbaptized children are really losing something. Okay, they're losing the opportunity for the beatific vision. And that means that there's far more to gain by living, because life then becomes the only opportunity that you have to gain the beatific vision. And that should lend greater urgency to missionary activity, as well as ending abortion and protecting the lives of infants and children. Okay, so if limbo is their fate, then it's more serious that they live life and have the opportunity to become Christians through baptism and then merit greater rewards. Okay, so those are my reasons for favoring limbo.